Good evening, everyone. We are quickly moving on to chapter 9 of Second Samuel. This one takes place after chapter 8. And so, just by way of review, if you realize these words then is actually the conjunction valve, and it's called a conjunction, a valve consecutive, that it is a sequence of narratives. And so I would like to always use this terminology, and then, right? And then means that this happens after chapter 8. Now, after chapter 8, chapter 9 comes about and says, David is speaking here. David is saying, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul? Now, he is now thinking of the house of Saul. Now, in chapter 7, he was thinking of the house of God, building a house for God. Now, in chapter 9, he is now thinking about the house of Saul. Now, as you notice, the word house is bait, right? And remember, it refers to the structure, it refers to a home, it refers to a tent, it refers to a dynasty, it refers to the descendants of Saul. And so in this case, when it says the house of Saul, it's talking about the descendants of Saul. Is there anyone left? Now, this word, is there anyone left, in the Hebrew, talks about, is there anyone remaining? That's one way of looking at it. Anyone remaining in the house of Saul? Is there anyone or any being existing? That would be the more literal translation. The word anyone here is any being existing that is still remaining. That's the word left, right? Remaining in the house of Saul. As you know, the Hebrew way of expression is it's different from how we would say things in the English or even in the Chinese. And that's what David is saying. And in the Hebrew language is very rich and vivid. Most of the words that they use has references to the action rather than the object. So the object is usually understood as the action that leads to the result. And so David is speaking and says, who else is in the house of Saul that I could show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now, this word here, kindness, is chesed. It's usually used for loving kindness or loyalty, and that's chesed. And the other word here is show. Literally, all these words that we see, show, make, produce, do, literally means do, right? Make. Uh, and so on and so forth. It's to cause an effect. Right? That would be a good way of looking at it. And it is for Jonathan's sake. Now, the word Jonathan's sake would be uh, on account of Jonathan. And recall in First Samuel, you find that David and Jonathan were bosom buddies. They're so close to each other, and they would give their lives to each other. And as we have seen at the end of First Samuel, Jonathan died. And now in chapter 9, he is now reflecting house of Saul, and in particular, Jonathan, because it wasn't so much for Saul, but more for Jonathan. And so now we go to verse 2. It says, um, in the house of Saul, right? In the house of Saul, was a servant. So it says, noun, a servant of the house of Saul. The name was Ziva. And they called, the word summon is to call him. And they called him to David. Now, it means that these would be David's, I would say, assistants, if you want to call it that way. And so the word they is implied, right? Implied. And they called him to David because David was inquiring. Here, the king is David, said to him. Him in this case would be Ziva. And David said, are you Ziva? And Ziva said, and he said, so he is Ziva. And it says, and all he said was, your servant. So what we find is that there is no I am in the Hebrew text. It's just put into the text so that when we read in English, we could say, oh, okay, it reads very well. Now, what essentially it means is when you see Ziva coming to David, he merely, I would imagine, bow down his head and says, your servant. So are you Ziva, your servant? And essentially, you're seeing Ziva presents himself to David as your servant, not so much as speaking in a conversation with David. That's what I'm trying to show you, that in the Hebrew context, it's really a lot of imagination of the actions, right? And whatever is said is towards the actions that is being drawn for us to visualize in our minds. We come to verse 3. Then, now notice all these, I would say this is, and then after the meeting with Ziva, and Ziva presents himself to David, your servant. The king said, notice the king would be David. David said, and David said these words, is there no one remaining? And the word remaining here, how should we say? It's not the same word as left. Although it's translated as left, I would say, is there no one? Let me just try to explain it this way. An end of continuance, right? Continuance of man. Okay. Now this is a bit more archaic, but basically what David is saying is, in the house of Saul, would there be someone left? And so what you read here in the English is the interpretation of the Hebrew word. But the literalness of the Hebrew word would find it very archaic in the English. So what I was trying to show you is that oftentimes you find that the translator is not translating, but is interpreting the Hebrew text rather than giving you what the Hebrew is saying. So it'll give you an equivalent. The moment you give you an equivalent, that would be an interpretation. But the idea here is that David was asking, is there any continuity of people, of a man in the house of Saul to whom I could show the chesed, right? The chesed of God. And Ziva replied to the king, well, there is still a son of Jehonathan who is disabled in both feet. Now, we have read of this instance a couple of chapters ago, and it described that in the rush of running away, he was a young child and he fell and broke his feet. So the text here says that he is, how should we say, stricken, lame. What else is there? Stricken, right? Stricken in this word, both is two of feet. So the English, you can see the English is trying to give us a very nice style, but in the Hebrew, they don't care about English style. So there is still one son, right? A son of Jonathan. That is still, so this is an answer to this question. One who is lame or stricken in two of the feet. In verse 4, now we say, so this is another continuation. So, and then I like this better because it gives us a sense of continuation. And then the king said to Ziva, where is he? And Ziva said to the king, says, behold, he is in the house of Makir ben Amiel in Lo Debar. And this is a location. And notice how the conversation goes. There's always this kind of a repeat. You can see here in verse 5, it says, then the king sent messengers who brought him from the house of Makir, the son of Amiel from Lo Debar. Remember this word here, the word send. Send is shalak. Send is to send on behalf. Send on behalf, to represent the sender. All right. And the word send messengers, then you will find, how should we say, there is no word messenger here. Okay. In the Hebrew, it just merely says, and King David sent, right? Sent. And the word who is not who there, it is and. So King David sent some people, and so this is the meaning of the word sent. Then King David shalak. So he was sending people on behalf of himself, and they went to fetch him or take him. So this word brought is the word take, right? It took him from the house of Makir ben Amiel from Lo Debar. And I guess today I wanted to show you a little bit more of the Hebrew so that you would know that sometimes the English words that are added into the text, with the intent for the translators to show the readers how to read, sometimes it can be quite, well, it might be misleading in some sense, but you would not know that they have actually expanded the meaning and gave you an interpretation rather than a translation. Verse 6. Now, verse 6 has a couple of words missed out, and then that's, I guess, is done intentionally as part of an English style. I wouldn't blame them for it, but it's an English style. So you see this, the vav here means that this word would be and then, which would be in the front, but it's missing, right? It's missing, but it's okay. Just to be more complete and thorough in the explanation, you find that verse 6 comes after verse 5. After those who were sent by David went to fetch the son of Jonathan. And so after he fetched the son of Jonathan, the description of the narrative in verse 6 is, and then Mephibosheth, that's the name, Mephibosheth, and this is Bain Jehonathan, the son of Jonathan. And then you say is Bain Shaul, the son of Saul. And then let me just pause here for a moment just to highlight another thing. When it says a name, Mephibosheth, so we get a name. So anytime you get a name, you really don't know who this person is in the Hebrew until you get the son of so-and-so, who is the son of so-and-so. And so these will be what we call lineage linkage, that this name is the son of this person, and this person is a son of this person. And so now we've got A, B, and C put together so that we can identify this person, Mephibosheth, truly is a unique individual in this part of the narrative, that he is the son of Jonathan, who was the son of Saul. Now, if you say son of Jonathan, it could be any Jonathan, but if it's son of Jonathan, son of Saul, you are narrowing down the family lineage. And so he came to David. And so we see this word come. Please do not misunderstand. The word come doesn't mean you walk there. It just describes the way of the concept of arrival. Because Mephibosheth cannot walk. So do not assume that when you say the word come means there is a walking action. He was just there. And when he arrived in front of David, it says here he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Now let's work on this, right? This is an A and a B. Understand this, fell on his face and prostrated himself really means one and the same. If this was David, then prostrating himself would be something like that. Now he had no legs, okay? It would be on the ground, and this would be very much telling us this is fell on face. And the English word is prostrate. Now the word prostrate means to cause oneself to, well, I guess you could say to fall flat on the ground. And this is a very ancient Oriental way. When you meet somebody who is greater than you will prostrate yourself. Now, oftentimes you look at the word prostrate as something that will kneel down, but that's not the word. There is a Hebrew word for kneeling down, and they don't kneel down. They actually prostrate themselves to show that there is a symbolic gesture of humility, that you know who is greater than you. That's a picture of prostrate, fall on face, meaning it's literally on the ground. Now, however, this is the word that is commonly translated as worship in the English Bible. And oftentimes when I just try to clarify that the word is not worship because there is no equivalent English word that we understand today called worship in the Hebrew. And the expression of prostrating and falling on face is often used to, to bow oneself and fall on the face, to pay homage to the king, to the angels, to people who are greater than you. That would be the way that is described in the word. So remember, in the Hebrew words, it's all very action oriented, so that you can actually visualize what did Mephibosheth do when he was there in front of David. He was all on the ground and recognizing David is the king. Now, Mephibosheth is the son of the previous king, but it has no matter now because the only ruling king matters. The ex-king doesn't matter. And if you were the descendant of the ex-king, you had no power. And so you're just like anybody else, unless the king extends a kind gesture to you. So we read here, and then David said, so the word and here is, and then, meaning after the prostrating, paying homage, David said, Mephibosheth. And then Mephibosheth says, here is your servant. So again, he is presenting himself there on the ground, face to the ground. He is just saying these words while he is there paying homage. Now, understand this, he can't stand up right now because he is lame, right? He is lame. Now we read the king's words. After the presentation, again, you find the Hebrew narrative, the Vav consecutive. And then David said to him, he says, do not be afraid. Do not fear. Right? Do not fear. This is the same word that tells us fear God. So it says that do not fear. And he assures him, for I will assuredly show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jehonathan. So I will certainly show kindness, show chesed, do chesed to you, for the sake of your father Jehonathan. Why? Because David and Jonathan are really bosom buddies. And then it says here, and I will restore to you all the land of your, well, it says your grandfather. All right. I don't know how to explain this to you. There is no grandfather. And in the Hebrew, it tells us that it is the father, your father, Saul. I will return to you all the land, all the fields that belongs to your father Saul. And then the second part is very important. And you yourself shall eat. And it says, eat. And it says, eat bread, which is missing here. Not just eat, but eat bread at my table. And it says, regularly. The word regularly here means continually. Right? Continually. I guess regularly, perpetually, daily, frequently. I guess these are to convey the idea of all the time, when all the time doesn't mean every day, but as often as possible, right? As often as possible. That would be a very expressive word here, I think. You can actually see how it is expressed. This is how David is saying in the Hebrew that I will grant you, I will grant you the authority to eat bread at my table. Means there is a royal invitation. And as a royal invitation to eat at my table, it is an expression, not only merely literally eat bread or eat food at my table, that is the table of David. Uh, it is also to say that it is an indication of fellowship. It is a right hand of fellowship because in the Hebrew context, to extend fellowship is to eat bread and drink wine. I guess in the ancient, in the old American Indian culture, they would smoke the peace pipe. In the Oriental Chinese culture, it will be let's all come and eat rice. Now, it may not, you're not literally just eating rice, but you're having a meal in that sense, right? You're having a meal. Uh, and so eat bread is having meal, is a royal invitation. It's a symbol of fellowship, and it's a royal fellowship that is extended to the son of Jonathan on behalf of Jonathan, in extension of the close fellowship and relationship and friendship with Mephibosheth's father. And so that is this expression, eat bread at my table continually, means I extend the right hand of fellowship to join me together as equals, as my friend. You find that you don't have enemies sitting at the table. You only have friends sitting at the table. In Psalm chapter 23, you find that the expression says that you prepare a table for me before my enemies. The enemies are not sitting across the table. They are standing there. They have no part of the table, but only people with fellowship, or the right hand of fellowship, is extended. And so Mephibosheth has that on the basis of Jonathan's relationship with David. When we come to verse 8, now verse 8 is another interpretation. This word again is and then. And this is a interpretation. I would say it's a translation, it's an interpretation, and it's not wrong. I won't say it's wrong because he prostrated himself. Notice he had done it once, and he did it once in verse 6. Okay, the first time in verse 6. Now in verse 8, the translator is trying to have a good sense of English style and brings to your mind, well, he's doing this again. His face to the ground, prostrating himself. But the word here for the Hebrew speaker is not again, it is and then. It is so that we can visualize after giving Mephibosheth the right hand of fellowship to sup with him, to eat with David, that is an incredible invitation. It's with the king. You know, imagine the king inviting you to eat with him as often as practical, as often as possible. And that would be an awesome invitation. Is to show the public that there is a sense of respect granted to Mephibosheth. And we know that it's because of Jonathan. And so Mephibosheth says, what is your servant? And let me use a different color. It says here, What is your servant that you should be concerned about a dead dog like me? Now let's look at this phrase. What about? What is means what about? Right? What about your servant? Remember, the servant means I'm one who will obey and listen to what you instruct. So always remember the word servant is one who takes orders to do it. No one would simply say, I'm your servant. So we saw in chapter 8, when it says, we are your servant, and they will give tribute to David. Servant is one who would subject himself to the master. And so the master is David, and he calls himself a servant. It says that you should be concerned about a dead dog like me. I guess you could say this phrase, dead dog. Let me say this dead dog literally means I think it says is the dying dog. I think dying dog would be better. The dying dog, not it's the, and it is talking about him as a descendant of Saul. And the word concern, all right, is an interpretation. And so the word concern here means this, that you would turn towards, pay attention to. So the word be concerned is an English interpretation, and I don't think it's wrong. I say that you should turn to the dying dog, like me. The dying dog means it is dying, right? It is dying. Two things here: dying as an action, and it would be dead soon, right? Sometime. So there is a certain end, the sense of ending to it. A dog, one who is, which is, well, I guess a dog is unclean. It's called an unclean animal. Um, you call it unclean animal, but it's unclean mainly because you can't use a dog for a sacrifice. But apart from that, it's fine. You don't eat a dog, you don't use it for sacrifice, and there are dogs around. These dogs are very loyal, they have a good function, and so they are there. But this is not just a dog, this is a dying dog. And so a dying dog means it's useless, right? So why did Mephibosheth call himself a dying dog? Because he is lame, both feet. So he really feels sorry for himself because he can't do anything. I guess for a guy to think of it that way, yeah, I guess some people might feel that they have no more reason to live. Now, in this conversation with David, David is perhaps doing some form of a counseling as well to extend chesed to Mephibosheth. So look at what David is saying, verse 9. Then, again, understand this, and then, this is what it means, right? After the expression of Mephibosheth, the king called, all right? The king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, and this is a very interesting assignment. Everything that belonged to Saul and to all his house, I have given to your master's grandson. Um, so let me just break this down a little bit. The word um, master is Adon, and the word grandson is literally son. So let me just pause to give us a closure to some of these words. Father, everybody who is above. Son, everyone who is below. Now, what does this mean? For Mephibosheth, he is, in our modern day terms, the grandson of Saul. But the Hebrew doesn't have the word grandson. But we know in terms of relationship, he is the son of Jehonathan, the son of Saul, Shaul. And the Hebrew just says father, because anyone above Mephibosheth is the father. That's what it means. Now, this word here is spoken to Ziva. So when David speaks to Ziva, he says, your master is Saul. If your master is Saul, the master is not Jehonathan, not Jonathan, it's Saul. And so Mephibosheth is your master's son. So anyone below the master is called a son, even though it's grandson. And typically it says your son's son, the son of your son. But in this case, son is as good as son of your son. So in Hebrew, you would find that it is just father and son. But in the English, as we have read, it is translated as grandfather and grandson. How did you know? So that is an interpretation. It's correct, right? But it's an interpretation. It is not a translation. That is what I had wanted to point out. In verse 10, you is Ziva, and your sons and your servants shall till the land. This word cultivate is to work on the land. I think that would be a better way. Work, right? Work on the land. Like the one, like the word servant, serve the land. The land here is Adama. Serve the land. And so in English, we have translated it or interpreted this as cultivate. But the actual word used is to serve the land, because you don't abuse the land and the land will not give you anything. So you need to serve the land so that the land will bring forth its produce. And that's how the Hebrew looks at the relationship between the land and the person working on it. And David says, and you shall bring in, and there is no word produce, by the way. The word produce here is implied, and it's correct. I mean, it is about working on the land, and then you bring in the fruit of the land. But in Hebrew, you don't need to say that so specifically, right? It's implied. And it says, so that your master's grandson, again, your master is Saul. Although he's dead, that's the relationship. And this would be son. There's no grandson there. But it is grandson in its interpretation. Will have food to eat. And this literally means you have food, and in Hebrew context is bread, lechem, right? In Asian context, perhaps you say rice to eat, but so they say bread to eat. So food is an interpretation. Bread is a translation. I hope you see the idea that I'm trying to get at. Nevertheless, the word nevertheless basically means and, right? And Mephibosheth, your master's son or grandson, he says, he shall eat. And this word here is eat bread. Right? Eat bread at my table regularly. Now, this is a repeat of the previous verse, verse 7, right? Verse 7. This is verse 7. A repeat. Regularly is continually. This is also to show Siva that Mephibosheth has exceptional kindness extended to him by David, the bosom buddy of Mephibosheth's father. Right? This is the understanding. So now Ziva had 15 sons and 20 servants, a lot of people. In verse 11, then Ziva said to the king, note the conversation. He says, in accordance with everything that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. Now, this is very English. And so it says this. It says literally like everything that you uh you command, you commanded, uh you commanded my lord the king to your to his servant, right? To his servant. And then the next phrase is the word thus. So it will be thus, therefore, or so. Your servant will execute, or basically do it, right? So what I could wanted to show you is the English is very polished, but the Hebrew is, it sounds a bit archaic in our English. But I like the literal translation because it gives us a better feel of exactly what is being said. And of course, then you will have to interpret exactly what you can recognize. So everything that you commanded my lord the king to his servant, that is Ziva, therefore, as according to you say, I will execute it, I will do it. And so Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's son. Now, this is a very important, I guess, picture that's given to us. It is extending an equivalent ranking or importance at the table, right? It's nothing to do with politics here. It's to show that in a fellowship of eating together as friends, Mephibosheth is like a son of David. And so David treats Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, like one of his sons. That's the picture in verse 11. Verse 12, then we are told, oh, Mephibosheth had a young son. In this case, the word katan could be young, it could be small. It means insignificant as well. Whose name is Micah. Right? His name is Micah. And all who lived in the house of Ziva were servants to Mephibosheth. And so you find that there will be people who would serve Mephibosheth because Mephibosheth is lame. He is unable to walk and do a lot of things. And so there were servants to help him out. In our final verse, that's verse 13, so and Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem. And remember, Jerusalem is the city of David. That's a place where it was a stronghold of the Jebusite. And it is a city of David because David moved in. He had his palace built by King Hiram. And Jerusalem became a focal point of the glorious kingdom of Israel. And for Mephibosheth to live in Jerusalem is, I would say, is an incredible significance to the public that there is gratitude granted upon Mephibosheth, which is not seen in other people. And because he ate at the king's table regularly, continually, in other words, because you would say the fact that he has to live in Jerusalem is so that he can attend to the king's table. If it's far away, you can't do it regularly or continually. And so he was moved physically to the proximity of the king. And so that's also some really incredible graciousness extended. And we are told again that he was disabled in his 2 feet. And basically it says lame. That's basically what we're told. He is lame. He is unable to walk. So unable to walk. Remember, the word lame is a description. The picture that the Hebrew wants to convey to us is that he is unable to walk. Rather than thinking of somebody who's lame, we are visualizing someone who cannot walk with the 2 feet. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 9. Is there a word for worship in Hebrew? No. The only word that we have in the Hebrew language is to prostrate, right? To fall on your face. Oftentimes people translate it as bow down, but it's not really bowing down in that sense. It's really to fall flat on the face as paying homage. I think we can actually see in different places around the world, like in India, in China, especially during the Chinese New Year, people actually are prostrated on the ground. I was made to understand that the Chinese practice of kowtow, it is similar to this concept of prostrating, right? Can chesed be translated as love, as into provide? Oh, no. Chesed Chesed would be seen as kindness, to show certain form of an affection, to grant certain form of mercy, to demonstrate certain forms of loyalty. And so chesed would be a picture of respect, I would say, a picture of respect and a demonstration of kindness, in the sense of the actions that will describe kindness and respect. And so we all talk about respect and kindness, chesed, and you notice in the act of David, it's not about a speech or about a word, but it's about the action that he extended to Mephibosheth, to be able to have the right hand of fellowship, to be treated like a son, to sit at the table, to enjoy a meal all the time with the king, as if he is one of the king's own family. And so chesed can be visualized, right? It can be seen. Similarly, like love. Okay, so but chesed and ahav are two different words. Next question. The Torah does not require David to treat Jonathan's son as such, but he's doing out of his bond with Jonathan. That is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. Now, I want to point out to you that in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 21 to 22, when Saul, for the second time, was practically available to be killed by David, which he didn't. And David said, "Look, I could have killed you, but I didn't." And Saul said, "You're more righteous than me." And Saul asked David to swear to him, "Do not cut off my descendants." That is also one oath that he has to honor, I believe, right? He has to honor that oath as well. Did Mephibosheth have Micah only after moving near David? We don't know. If you look at verse 12, it doesn't say, and it seems to say that he already had the son. And you notice they never talk about the wife here, but he had the son. And so there is a continuity of Mephibosheth, number one. And number two, there is a protection of the house of Saul as honoring the oath and the swearing to Saul. I think that would be a way of looking at it. Yes.
In earlier chapter, you said that King Saul dynasty will come to an end. But in this case, there's continuity from Jonathan to Jonathan's son and son.
Okay. So understand this. When you talk about dynasty, we're talking about a royal lineage. And so there will no longer be kings to take over from Saul. But he has his children, his house, right? That's what it means.
So it doesn't mean that his descendants will
Oh no, it's not an end to his descendants, but it's end to the fact that his descendants will never be king.
Oh, okay. So it refers to his kingship then.
Correct. They will no longer be royalty after Saul.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'll see you all tomorrow then.